Welcome to the How to Be Awesome at Your Job podcast, the show where brilliant professionals share how to sharpen the universal skills required to flourish at work. Enjoy more career fun, wins, meaning, and money with your host, Pete Makaitis.
Hello and welcome to episode 916 with Todd Rogers. If you have ever had the experience where you write something, you put some real thought into it, and then no one replies or the reply is lackluster and folks don't do what you want them to do, Todd has got some excellent answers, principles for writing to busy readers so that you can impact them, they hear you, they do the things, and they move things forward all the more often. Todd's got some counterintuitive studies, some juicy science with real quantified results that may just transform the way you write forever. So you'll learn 1, why people aren't reading and what to do about it. 2, the critical question that will improve your writing. And 3, the simple trick to get people to respond to your request. So if you want to check out the show notes or the transcript or the links to items that we've referenced here, please drop on by awesomeatyourjob.com/EP916. And I'd also recommend, if you're a busy reader, you sign up for our Gold Nugget email list. That will provide you with summary wisdom that you can read in about 2 to 3 minutes each time a new guest episode goes live. So you can read that in a jiffy. It's nicely formatted, just the way Todd tells us to. Sorry for the spoiler. And you get access to the whole vault, the archive of all 916 of these, as well as getting the updates each time there is a fresh episode released. Those are the gold nuggets at awesomeatyourjob.com. Now here's a bit about Todd. Todd Rogers is co-author of Writing for Busy Readers and professor of public policy at Harvard's Kennedy School of Government. He's the faculty director of the Behavioral Insights Group, faculty chair of the Executive Education Program Behavioral Insights and Public Policy, senior scientist at Ideas 42, and academic advisor at the Behavioral Insights team. Todd co-founded the Analyst Institute, which improves voter communications and serves on its board. He also co-founded Everyday Labs, which partners with school districts to reduce student absenteeism by communicating with families, is an equity holder, and serves as chief scientist. Todd received his Ph.D. jointly from Harvard's Department of Psychology and the Harvard Business School. Now, here's Todd. Todd, welcome to How to Be Awesome at Your Job.
Thanks, Pete. Happy to be here.
Well, it's fun. I saw you have the book Persuasion on your bookshelf, and then we had a moment of discussing how we both love Dr. Robert Cialdini, who we interviewed on the show, which was one of my favorite guests ever, partially because we wanted him for so long. But you actually got to collaborate directly with him. Tell us the tale.
Well, I read his book Influence, The Science of Persuasion in undergrad, and I was like, this stuff is cool. And not too long after college, decided I wanted to get a PhD in work just like that. And so he was always on my mind. And then as I got to know him as a social psychologist and behavioral scientist, eventually, a few years ago, he and I had been talking about a project for a while. And he asked if I wanted to collaborate with him, with Jessica, my co-author on the book that I hope we're about to talk about. And actually, I got choked up on the phone call when he asked if we would collaborate with him, because I just felt like it was like full circle that he was a real inspiration for why I'm doing a lot of this stuff. And so, yeah, so it was really cool. We did a paper on how to respond to attack ads and the psychology of how to respond to attack ads when your attacker is louder and dishonest. We just came up with that.
Okay. So this is like if I am running for office.
Yes.
Well, just for my future reference, should that be coming down the pike for me, how do I respond to louder and lying attack ads?
I haven't thought about this paper in a little bit, but the basic idea is that if you respond to an attack by countering it and say, that's not true. I did not crash my car while drinking, and so on. And then in a way, it reinforces the underlying message that whatever the attack was. Let's say I was hypothetically falsely accused of drunk driving, getting into a car accident. And so what Bob had this idea that is just brilliant, obviously, was what you should do is instead say, when my opponent says this, know that what they are really doing is deflecting from the fact that they have broken the law in so many other ways. What you do is you create a different association so that whenever the attack comes, people cognitively associate it with its own response. And so it's called the poison parasite. You sort of parasitically attach the response so that whenever they reuse the image or the phrase or the whole idea, it automatically, through memory, what's called conditioned association, it automatically makes accessible its response that negates the attack.
Okay. Well, that's just handy to know for future reference.
Yeah. That's not what we're talking about. But it's cool. Like it's cool how memory, like you can associate things to other objects so that when those objects come up, they bring to mind other things. And so instead of responding in like directly, what you do is you keep repeating their phrase and say, when they use this phrase, think of this. When they use this phrase, think of this. And then whenever they use the phrase, it becomes self-negating.
Fabulous. Thank you. Well, we are talking about your book, Writing for Busy Readers, Communicate More Effectively in the Real World. And I'd love it if you could share with us, having studied reading and writing for so long, can you kick us off with a particularly striking, surprising, fascinating, counterintuitive discovery you've made about this stuff over your career that really sticks with you?
It's a really high bar, but I will start with something that after saying it is obvious, but is underappreciated. No one is reading what we're writing.
Okay.
That's the place to start. Everyone is skimming. Everyone is busy. And their goal when they read anything we send them is to move on as quickly as possible. So quickly that very often it means moving on before even understanding what we're saying.
All right. So that sounds true. I guess in our heart of hearts, if we don't want to believe it, well, surely my trusted colleagues and collaborators who value my input are carefully reading. Do you have any striking data points or studies that underscores this?
We have a ton of randomized trials where we test different elements of writing to see whether people are actually reading it. So let me just do one. One of the principles in the book is called Writing for Busy Readers. And one of the principles is less is more. And we do a whole series of these experiments. I'll just describe one where someone is sending a message. In this case, it could be fundraising messages. It could be an organ, like sign up for registration of a webinar. It could be fill out a survey. It could be respond to me about a time. We'll do one where I was emailing 7,000 elected school board members. We had written a web crawler. I was surveying them. And it started with a bunch of gratitude expressions and respect. Thank you so much. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Serving the youth and shaping the future generation.
You got it, Pete. It sounds like you could have written it. Yeah, we just dictate this. But it turns out that was all useless, but you got the spirit of it. So a long thank you. You're so important. You're doing great stuff. And you are. It's a really hard job. Nobody likes you because you're making hard choices. Thank you. Will you please fill out my survey? And in the other condition, we said, I'm a professor, same first sentence, and then deleted all the gratitude. Please fill out my survey. The important thing is we had a couple hundred people read both versions and predict which one will get more responses. Literally almost everyone, 93% of people think that the more deferential, longer message will get more responses. But consistent with literally every experiment we've ever run on this topic, the shorter one was substantially more effective. In this case, twice as many respondents when we eliminated all the extra words. Similarly, I ran an experiment with a large federal political committee. Then I'm not supposed to say which party, but one of the big parties in the United States, and there aren't that many. And they were sending 700,000 donors an email for fundraising. It was 6 paragraphs. I just said, let's arbitrarily delete every other paragraph so it doesn't even make sense anymore. So we just went from 6 to 3 by just randomly deleting paragraphs. People read them. They agree. It's incoherent.
America, freedom.
When we cut every other paragraph, still increases donation by 16%. One principle is less is more.
Okay. Wow. Oh, I can see why you and I both love Bob Cialdini, and I love everything you're saying. Data-driven and impactful. Wow. So you said almost nothing. I'm a professor. Please fill out this survey. And that is ideal.
It's worth flagging. It is almost certainly better if someone reads all the respectful, deferential verbiage. That is probably more effective if they read it all. Because I'm showing all this respect. But stage 1 is, do they read it at all? And it is very common to just deter people from engaging with what we write by just having extra words. Like, think about how you go through your inbox. I do these surveys whenever I teach it. It's like, okay, you have 2 messages in your inbox. One is 3 sentences, the other is 3 paragraphs. Which one do you read first? Everyone reads the 3-sentence one. Everybody's busy, everybody's skimming, and they're just doing triage with this like flood of stuff coming at them.
Yeah, and I suppose the exceptions are probably quite limited. Like, I am choosing to read a novel for the pleasure of enjoying reading words and visualizing scenes and connecting with these characters. There's that, but that's maybe, is it fair to say, Todd, that's only when you're reading novels, more or less?
Yeah. I mean, there are, when we're reading poetry, when we're reading The New Yorker, or when we're reading novels, it's a different purpose of reading. The kind of writing that Jessica and I are talking about in the book is practical writing. It could be text messaging your parents to like coordinate for Thanksgiving dinner. It could be writing to your boss. It could be sending a sales pitch or proposal to a client. Practical writing that is not recreational. Everybody's skimming. We need the TLDR version of our long book, which is not that long, is we need to make it easier for our readers. And the easier we make it for our readers to read and skim, the more likely they are to read, understand, and respond.
All right. Less is more. That's powerful and self-explanatory. You gave us a couple examples, but tell us, Todd, is there anything else we need to know about this principle to begin putting it into action right away and enjoying its benefits?
There are 3 parts to less is more, but I will be very, very brief about it. Fewer words, fewer ideas, which is the hard part. That means deciding some ideas may be helpful, but not worth it because there's trade-offs. And the third is fewer requests, which I think people don't intuitively get at first. If I ask you for 4 things, 1, you may postpone doing any of them. 2, you're going to do the easiest one first. And 3, you may just get derailed on the process of going from 1 to 2, and then you just get distracted. We've seen in experiments of all kinds of variety that when you ask for multiple things, you're less likely to get any one of those things done than if you ask for one thing. And so it really, again, just like writing, it just requires prioritizing, like knowing what your most important things are and deciding whether it's worth the cost of adding more.
So let's say, Todd, I am sending out a sales pitch, or I want to persuade you or some other guest to appear on the podcast. I could say less is more, say, hey, I think your book is awesome. Come on to my show. But I think as I put myself in their shoes, it's like, okay, who are you? And is your show legit? And so it's like, I got to give them a little more, but do I like have an attachment or a link, or how do I think about this?
There isn't a single right answer. You know your context, your goals, your audience. That said, you know that I'm skimming.
Yeah.
And so what we say in my lab, I'm not saying everyone should do it, but in our lab, no email should be more than 4 sentences. Let me give you context. In our lab, it'll be like, Pete, sentence 1, so fun being on the podcast. Thanks for having me. 2, at the end of it, you asked me a question about this. 3rd, below, I have more details about that, or attached or linked. Here are more details. 4, let me know if you have any other questions about it. And then, Todd, then underneath, I can have it organized so that it's easy to skim, and we can use the other principles. But like, what you don't want is it to be buried in like 4 paragraphs later that like, oh, the details of the answer to your question. And so if you're emailing me, I think probably the optimal way is like the first paragraph is some version of like, it's 3 sentences or 2 sentences being like, admire your work. Would love to have you on the podcast. Details about the podcast are below. Lots of great people have been on it, including our mutual friend, Bob Cialdini. And then below, it's like, I'm the best. And the how to be awesome at your job is awesome. And you'd be more awesome at your job if you were on my job, my podcast, or whatever it is.
Yeah. Okay, cool. So less is more, fewer ideas, fewer words, fewer requests. Let's see the second one. It's make reading easy.
Make reading easy. And that is short words, common words, short, simple sentences. The coolest thing that I learned when Jessica and I were writing this book, and I don't want to speak for her on this. She actually, when she talks about it, there are other things that she found to be the coolest thing she learned. But for me, it was the vision tracking research where when you compel people to read, they go word, 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 and you're watching their eyes, the eye tracking you, word, 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 period. And then they pause at the period. It's this thing very creatively called the period pause effect, which is that people pause at the period and they just sit there, and you may not even notice it. I don't notice it. I didn't notice it till I read this stuff. But when you read, you're just like, you pause there to make sure that you get what the idea was. And very often you have to go backwards and reread. And that's because the sentence was kind of complex and you didn't really get it. So it's cognitively taxing. It requires a lot of effort to read complicated writing with unfamiliar long words. That's problem one. So that means people are going to quit in the middle of it. Two, it's totally inaccessible to a very large fraction of people when we write in ways that are difficult to read. So the median United States adult, that means the 50th percentile adult, if you rank order them on their reading ability, reads at a 9th grade reading level. And so when we write in ways that are complex, we're inaccessible, unreadable to a large fraction of people. But even to those who are able to read it, the audience that is able to read these complex sentences with unfamiliar, uncommon words, for them, it's cognitively taxing, and they're just more likely to give up and move on. So the idea is, again, like the easier we make it, the more effective it is, the kinder it is to our reader, because we're making it faster for them and we're less depleting. It's also more accessible and inclusive because more people can read our stuff.
All right. So when we talk about long sentences and big words, any particular numbers or rules of thumb you have in mind?
No.
12 words max.
Yes. Make it as easy as possible for your reader. And that honestly depends on context, and it depends on what the expectations. I work with people who write intelligence assessments in the intelligence community. And I was working with somebody who said that their reports have to be 20 pages. That's the norm.
Oh.
You can't write it shorter than that without looking like you didn't do your job. And so, okay, well, you can't make it shorter. You can make it easier to read.
Yeah.
So you can write with shorter, more common sentences and words. You can also make it skimmable, which I'm sure we'll get to is the third. Make it easy to jump around. You have to write.
And maybe pictures?
Yes. If pictures convey it more easily to your reader, then great. Everything is through the lens of how do I make it easier for the reader? How do I make it easier for the reader?
Okay. Understood. So next up, you've got design for easy navigation.
Oh, we're right on. We just queued that one up. Nice. I think it flows naturally. Design for easy navigation. The idea is, this is going to sound like an absurd sentence, but Jessica and I are arguing we focus when writing too much on our writing. And really, if we take seriously that people are jumping around and they're skimming and they're moving on before they even get the main point, then we should design our writing like a map to give headings and guideposts to let people know what's here, what's there. And it allows them to jump around and find the parts that they want to dive into and read more closely, and then pop back up like a map and then navigate. We've run some experiments where we add headings or not to, a multi-paragraph message. And in one experiment we ran, it was a 6 paragraph, maybe it was 7 paragraphs, and we inserted headings or we didn't after the first, every 2 paragraphs. And then we looked at whether anyone read anything or acted on anything after the second paragraph, basically after the headings, more than doubled the likelihood that people got past the second paragraph. And the idea is just that, like, a sensible person optimizing with their limited time for how are they best going to use their next second as they're navigating their to-do list. If they can't figure out, it looks like a wall of text, they're going to look at it, maybe get it, jump around, and then give up. Unless it's super important to them, in which case they'll devote more time. But adding structure, make it easy for people to skim, makes it easier for busy readers to get through what we're writing to them and helps us be more effective.
Okay. Well, this is bringing me back, talking about easy navigation. And next up, we're talking about formatting. Use enough formatting, but no more is your rule of thumb. I'm reminded of back in the day, making a lot of slides at Bain & Company. There was a phenomenon, which I kind of thought was fun, where they had selective bolding. It's like customers who had their service requests met the first time were 87% more satisfied. And that part's bolded. And so I always read it in my head that way. It's like, I'm reading normal words and now these are bold. And I thought it was cool because from a visual perspective, if you were to talk about skimming, if you were to glance at the slide and read 15% of the words, the bolded ones, you would get it like, oh, okay. Getting it done right the first time is a huge deal. Okay, cool. And so here we have it. Thank you for your selective bolding.
I love it. And Bain is awesome at this. I'm sure if you were a consultant at Bain, you probably went through the training in the first couple of weeks where they teach you how to make a voicemail and an email. And this is a part of their like onboarding process. They're awesome at it. You talk about the selective bolding. I think it makes sense to talk both about design for easy navigation and use formatting judiciously or carefully together. And the idea is, how do we make it easier for readers? And in this case, what structure and components of structure do we add to our writing? So here's one that I love. It's not going to be formatting, but it's part of designing. I love the bottom line up front that the U.S. Army uses. It's called BLUF. For any veteran listening, and I don't know if you're a veteran, Pete, but like they're amazing at communications in the Army. And they have a regulation, literally like a formal reg that demands that any writing in the U.S. Army, first sentence is the bottom line up front. So if you were a general writing to an enlisted person or an enlisted person writing to a general, everyone knows where the bottom line is. It's the first line. And so it like completely makes it easy to skim. It also disambiguates. That's a word if we're talking about writing, so it's easy. It also just makes it clear to everybody how we write in our group. And that is especially helpful for lower status people. Like an enlisted person writing to a general, completely understandably, without clear guidance, would write something like, I admire your work, and it's, we once ran into each other in the mess together. You may not remember me. I'm also from Wisconsin. I just wanted to see if we could have a meeting next week, as opposed to now it's like meeting next week. I love that. It makes it easy for readers because they have rules and norms, and in this case, regulations about how we write. That won't work for everybody because different organizations and different people have different expectations about what a message is supposed to look like. If I wrote you a message like that, where the first line is, Pete, it was so fun being on the pod. Thanks for having me. I wonder if maybe you could have asked this question differently. And then whatever. Very different than if I was like, you should have asked. You see, you having clear norms on how we write. Your question was about formatting and the selective bolding that people at Bain and other places use. What Jessica and I found is that in a bunch of surveys, people interpret bold, underline, and highlight as the writer telling the reader, this is the most important content in this text. And so it's incredible at getting people to read whatever those words are. People, like, we do these experiments where we have a sentence that we're really interested in and we test people afterwards if they read it. And when it's not bolded or underlined or highlighted, nobody reads it. Half the people read it because it's midway through the document they're reading. And then when you bold, underline, or highlight it, everybody reads it. And so, okay, it's really powerful. People interpret it the way you would expect they interpret it. So then what we do is we use bold, underline, or highlight to draw attention to a different sentence that's near the one we care about. And everybody reads that other sentence, and it causes a bunch of people to skip the rest of the text because everyone's going fast. And when you tell them this is the most important sentence, it licenses those who are really short on time to just skip everything else. I got the key information. Got it. Thanks. Ready to move on. And so it's kind of, there's, again, like so much of this, there's trade-offs. You got to be really careful because people interpret you as serious when you say this is the most important thing, and it licenses them to not read the rest of it.
Mm-hmm. Understood. So it's very effective. It's so effective, it's dangerous because if you use it wrong, you're missing out. You read the thing I bolded instead of everything. And actually, whoopsies, I didn't bold the thing that I really, really needed you to read.
You got it. Exactly. I mean, again, like so much of this, like these are powerful tools as long as we use them well, but they also can go awry.
Okay. Another principle you have is tell readers why they should care.
It's a pretty straightforward one.
Well, it's the first quarter of every nonfiction business book. This is the most important idea ever.
That's fun. Yeah, it's right. And it's the title of your podcast. How to be awesome at your job. Because we are obsessed with randomized experiments, I'll just show you an illustration. Rock the Vote is an organization that gets young people to register to vote, often by having volunteers go to concerts. And they did this experiment where they were asking potential volunteers to volunteer. And in one case, the subject line was volunteer to register voters, because from the Rock the Vote perspective, that's the point. The main idea for Rock the Vote is we're getting people to volunteer to register voters. They did another condition where they said, go to concerts for free while registering voters. Go to free concerts while registering voters. From a reader's perspective, that's the thing they would care about a little bit more, right? If you focus on what the writer cares about, it's, I'm trying to get people to volunteer to register voters. But from the reader's standpoint, go to a Beyonce concert and register voters. That's an entirely different thing. What they found was when they focused on what the reader cared about, they 4x'd registrations. And the idea is, it's like you said, it's the beginning of every nonfiction business book. It's the title of your podcast. It's outrageously important and too easily overlooked that when we write, we focus on why we care about the thing. And that's all I care about. As Jessica and I, in writing this book, Writing for Busy Readers, we are trying to help writers be more effective at achieving their goals. In the process, whatever is necessary from the writer's perspective to be in the message, we should review that and elevate the parts that we think the reader might care most about, because that'll capture more of their attention, be more likely to motivate them to read and respond.
That is a tendency, is the writers talk about what they care about, what they're into, and then neglect sort of the audience first all the time. And I think I was guilty of that. And it was Nick Morgan's book, Give Your Speech, Change the World, that really landed it for me in my early days of keynoting. Like, you must start with the journey from why to how. But I love how so much. It's so exciting to me. I almost just assume, well, of course we all want to accomplish great things in this organization and have cool relationships and culture and have fun and get things done. So I don't even need to mention that. I could just get right into these super cool tactics I discovered. And that is just wrong. I have learned the hard way. You must tell readers why they should care, or listeners why they should care. Nick Morgan's right. You're right. And legions of nonfiction business book publishers and editors are not wrong. I might advocate that they shorten the why case a little bit in many of these books, but it absolutely needs to be there.
I'll +1 that shortening part.
Mm-hmm. All right. Now let's hear about Make Responding Easy.
Make Responding Easy is for those of your listeners and you who have followed behavioral science. Make Responding Easy is just about the essence of the greatest hits of behavioral science. If we reduce friction, we simplify processes. If we pre-populate forms, if we make it really easy to figure out what the key information is, people are more likely to get it and respond to it. Jessica and I have this mantra: if it's important for us, the writers, make it easy for them, the readers, right? That's the thing. If it's important for us, we want to make it easy for them. Here's an incredibly micro example that may be familiar to you, and it is way too familiar to me, which is a group email or group text of, let's find a time to meet. And I'll often initiate and be like, here are 6 times that work for me over the next 2 weeks. The next person verbatim will actually say, the 2nd and 3rd work for me, possibly the 5th and maybe the 6th. Then the chain dies.
Yeah.
Because, and the idea is that any reader first needs to understand what they were trying to say. Mm-hmm. But even if they do understand what they were trying to say, then they need to go, like, keep in mind 1st, 2nd, maybe 4th, 5th, and then go back down to mine and see which ones are they referring to, and back and forth. If it was actually important to you, if you want to make it easy, you'd say time X, Y, and Z work for me. I could do whatever is after Z. We'll call it A, even though I'm going in reverse order. And like, you actually repost them. And the idea is just like, if we want people to respond, we make it easy, which is, instead of having them navigate to figure out what's going on, you pull it all in one place. That's a trivial example. A really important example is if anybody remembers in 2000, there was a guy running for president named Al Gore who was running against another guy named George W. Bush. And it turns out it was one of the closest elections, maybe one of the closest elections in U.S. history. Florida swung the vote and it came down to a couple hundred votes. And it turns out that in Florida, there was this thing called the butterfly ballot, not the one that went to the Supreme Court for anyone who is conflating everything involving that election. It was a ballot that was extraordinarily complicated. And I teach it in my class. It was just really hard to follow what button you're supposed to push to vote for which person. I'm not even going to try to describe it to you. Like, look it up, butterfly ballot from 2000. But by making it like not easy, and it was actually designed by a Democrat who presumably might have preferred Al Gore, but it was a Democrat who in good faith was trying to help older people be able to read it. So in order to have giant font, they needed to use both sides of the page. And then to figure out what button to push, it just became comical how complex it was. And they think that led to something like 5,000 to 10,000 net votes for George W. Bush by accident because people type the wrong button because nobody can make sense of it. I say that only as like an extreme example of if we want to make, like I was talking about getting people to schedule a meeting. I also wanted to show that sometimes this matters for important things too.
That's powerful as an example. And it cuts to the core of why does it matter if one is awesome at their job? The consequences are massive. It's like someone was not so awesome at designing that ballot. And now we may never know who, quote unquote, should have gotten elected. And because of what went down with a butterfly ballot in Florida.
Look it up and get ready to laugh/cry. I mean, just amazing. I didn't even realize it until we started writing this book because I got it confused with these hanging chads for those of you who lived through it.
Well, yes. And I'm all about making responding easy or making whatever behavior you want to occur easy. And this is kind of BJ Fogg, Tiny Habits. We had him talking about that in terms of your own personal behavioral design, as well as in your communication. And I hope, Todd, you had an easy time scheduling this interview, clicking the guest FAQ page, and then the scheduling. And we did not have to have any communication whatsoever, in fact, for you to grab it.
It was super easy. That's the idea, right? Like you made it so like here, I think you used a Calendly or something like that. And it was just like, here's some availability, just choose one. It was not 17 back and forth emails to find a time that worked for us. I'll go a more practical one for people who are trying to be awesome at their jobs. It is estimated that Amazon's one-click purchasing generates billions of dollars in net revenue relative to before they literally patented one-click shopping. And the idea is just reducing steps makes people more likely to follow through. And in that case, it was increasing sales. In the part we're talking about in the election, it's swinging the fate of the republic.
And I'd heard that they have, in fact, parted with millions of dollars in legal fees, defending and enforcing this intellectual property against infringement. Like this is dearly precious to them.
Yeah. And I don't think anyone ever had thought that it would be better to buy things with one click instead of 5. Like it's really the genius was in coming up with that idea. It was no one could have thought of it prior to the geniuses at Amazon thinking of it. I'm being sarcastic in case anyone is trying to figure that out.
Well, certainly just like in general, when things are easier, you get that result. I think about occasionally someone needs to be paid via a check. Like I think I was getting some carpets. I was like, oh, a check, huh? Well, that's going to be a while. I got to figure out where that thing is, where the envelopes are, where the stamps are. And now I just really kind of don't want to because I was ready to go click, click, click. Here's your money. Thanks for the carpet. But now it might be a good week or two before I get all these components together for you.
Right. And honestly, it's a minute and a half of work, but you're still not going to do it. I mean, it's no animus. Like, it's just like you're a human and it seems like it's a pain. And I'd rather watch another episode on Netflix.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So these are powerful principles. Can you tell us, are there any specific do's, don'ts, words, phrases that you also want to make sure to mention beyond these broad principles.
The TLDR version of the book, the too long didn't read version of the book, and of all this work is that if we make it easy for our readers, they'll be more likely to read, respond, understand. It's also just kinder to them to write in a way that makes it easy for them. That's the big picture. How you then do that, how do you make it easier for the reader? That's what the book is about. And if you could put in the show notes, we have a one-pager, a checklist if people want it. I also, on our website, with a computer science colleague, we trained GPT-4 on the principles and then tuned it for email. So with some pre and post with edits. And it's incredibly good at rewriting your emails so that they're actually skimmable using the principles. And so you can find that at our website, writingforbusyreaders.com. And there's a Chrome extension and all sorts of people use it for their Gmail and stuff. The idea is, it turns out the AI tools, the LLMs, are very good at learning at like internalizing the principles, and then with examples can get better at applying them.
Okay, cool. And so that's a plugin that we use, or a series of prompts we feed it?
No, it's just on our website. You can paste an email, hit click, and then it outputs what it would look like if it were written according to these principles. And what's cool, it's like a teaching tool. It also is really useful just because these are good ideas. But I love it as just like it brings to life, instead of this, like, I don't know how I would apply that to this. It just makes suggestions. Well, I would turn this into a bulleted list. I would start this as a separate paragraph. I would simplify this. And it doesn't say these things, it just does them. I would simplify this sentence.
All right. That's
in the I was personifying our AI overlord.
Yeah, we tend to do that. All right.
Yeah.
How about a favorite study or experiment or bit of research?
There's this body of work that has just started over the last few years called subtraction neglect, which is that when you ask people to improve anything, this woman, Gabe Adams and collaborators at University of Virginia did it. You ask people to improve something, improve this itinerary for a trip to Washington, D.C., improve this short essay, improve this Lego construction item. People are massively biased towards adding things, and we just fail to think to even subtract things. And there's just this tendency across categories that if we want to, with quotes around it, improve things, we add. And very often we can improve, as Jessica and I talk about in writing, we can improve by subtracting, but it's just something that doesn't naturally or easily come to people's minds. It's incredible. It's really cool research by Gabe Adams and collaborators called Subtraction Neglect.
Oh, we had Leidy Klutz had a book talking along those lines. We had him on the show, and that was thought-provoking. Okay.
Yeah, Leidy is a co-author on all that work.
And a favorite book?
I don't know about my lifetime favorite, but my favorite recent book is called Recoding America by Jennifer Palka. She founded Code for America. She was the first chief digital officer of the U.S., and her big thesis is that complexity favors the sophisticated, that we have all these government agencies that have these complex systems that are unnecessarily complex for reasons that are both often policy driven, and we act like it's actually implementation. People who are implement what the policy says. And we should be redesigning policy because downstream that leads to actually better use of technology. But I love her like the last third of the book is about how complexity favors the sophisticated, which means that when we have complex processes, we deter not randomly, we deter the least sophisticated, the most harried, the possibly and often for government services, the most who would benefit from some of these things. But we have often processes that are unnecessarily complex. Jennifer Palka, Recoding America.
Okay. And a favorite tool?
I'm going to name two. One is pretty basic and the other is pretty frontier. The basic one, I love my Google Keep, which is just a to-do list keeper that is social and I can share with my wife and family members. And so we update the to-do list. It's so basic and central to our lives. The more sophisticated, and also your listeners are going to think I'm pretty basic. I love using ChatGPT in all of my life. And I love using GPT-4, the underlying tech, in some of the apps that we've made, because it's just like I probably use it several times a day in all sorts of creative ways, from editing things I'm writing to generating ideas to coming up with study materials. The other day I had it generate descriptions of flowers that might grow on Mars. And then it was because we were doing a silly study on what kinds of names people like. And I don't know. So from both basic, but one is pretty low, medium to low tech, which is the Google Keep, to the ChatGPT, which everybody would say. But I love the underlying LLM of GPT-4 and Bard and all of the LLMs for now. And again, I just want our AI overlords to know that I am naming them as my favorite.
And if folks want to learn more, get in touch, where would you point them?
Writingforbusyreaders.com. It has the checklist, the one-page checklist for the principles of how to write more effectively for busy people. It also has the AI editing tool for your emails. And it also has a lot of other resources that have been great, like substitution ideas for, instead of saying the reason is, you can say because. And there's a whole set, there's like thousands of like word pairs that you just never use this phrase. Always use this one because it's more concise and more direct. But www.writingforbusyreaders.com.
All right. And do you have a final challenge or call to action for folks looking to be awesome at their jobs?
Yeah. We write all the time. We are all writers, whether it's Slack messages, emails, text messages, proposals, reports. We write all the time. We should edit at a round of editing whenever we are writing anything where we ask ourselves, how do I make it easier for my reader? How to do that is going to depend on the context. And that's what Jessica and I have really focused on. But when you do that, when you edit through the lens of making it easier for the reader, you will be more effective at achieving the goals you have for whatever it is you are writing. In the process, it's also just kinder to your reader.
Beautiful. Todd, this is beautiful stuff. Thank you. And I wish you much good writing.
Thanks for having me, Pete. This was fun.
I love that school board study. Cut all those paragraphs, get double the response. That is beautiful. Less is indeed more often. And a great reminder whenever we're stressing, ooh, how do I impress this person who seemed really awesome or really thought out, and honor them and appreciate them? Maybe just less is more. Good stuff from Todd. Again, the show notes, the transcripts, and links to items that we've referenced are found at awesomeatyourjob.com/EP916. Hope to catch you next time, and peace.
Thanks for listening. To get the most out of the show, we recommend 2 key things. First, check out the extra resources at awesomeatyourjob.com. You can find this episode's transcript and links, as well as the perfect episode for your situation. You can search the full text transcripts of hundreds of episodes or explore episodes tagged by topic and competency covered. Second, subscribe to the podcast and get future episodes automatically. You can subscribe by telling Siri and several other smartphones and speakers, subscribe to the How to Be Awesome at Your Job podcast, or by tapping subscribe in your podcast player of choice. If you'd like some extra help figuring out podcasts and how subscriptions work, visit awesomeatyourjob.com/subscribe for guidance. Hope to catch you on the next episode of How to Be Awesome at Your Job.
1, 2, 3, 4. Those are numbers, but you already knew that. If you want to know what number you're going to pay each month for your car, use Kelley Blue Book My Wallet on Auto Trader. They're really good at numbers. Auto Trader.